First Lady Bonet. What a magnificent selection to interpret in advance that tender story of the Good Samaritan. Thank you for walking your life with this renegade pastor. My new friend and colleague, Dr. Selma. Seems unfair, so much talent should be in one family. I loved visiting with you all. It was when I first started in the job here as the conference minister. I'm in my full conference minister regalia. I dressed up for you. I have this medallion. It says the United Church of Christ, and at the bottom it says that they may all be one. That is our motto. That is our motto. And on the back, it says the Reverend Dr. Gordon Rankin, which is not my name. Unfortunately, my medallion has been lost in the mail, and so I am borrowing one for now, but let's not get into my hurt feelings about all that. I will save it for therapy, which will be later in the sermon. So thank you for inviting me. And when I was first getting to know my churches here, nobody invited me to come. So I just invited myself and started showing up, and I visited y'all, and you were so wonderful. And I came on a Friends and Family Sunday because I had to come and say hello in person for the first time and Godspeed farewell to Ivana, who was the chair of my search committee. Ivana, you better be watching. From the Philippines, right? Oh my goodness. It's so nice to be back with you all. And thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you also for your generosity to this congregation, for taking a portion of what you have, a tithe, a percentage, and giving it with others. We were created in the image of God, and God is generous. And so we are generous, and when we are generous, we feel connected to the image of God within us. Amen. And then the irony is that when we are grateful, that's how the whole cycle begins. That we're thankful for the money we have. And then in the beautiful irony of Jesus, we're so grateful for the thing we have that we give it away. And then you give it to the congregation, and then your congregation is part of a church family called the United Church of Christ. And even though I know you need the money to pay your own bills, there's something about when people are generous to you, what do you want to do? You want to pass a portion of that. So you pass a portion of it along to us at the Michigan conference, and we appreciate it. And trust me, we need the money too. But you know what we do? Because we respond. When you are generous to us, we take a portion of that and send it to the national UCC. So that on the news, when you see that some area has been devastated by flooding or something awful, or when you say, oh, I wish I could help the people of Ukraine, you already are helping. As Pastor said, the offering, you don't need to worry. You're already there. And that's what it means to be the church family. Let me do just a little Bible study on the story of the Good Samaritan, because many people know it or think they know it. I certainly thought I knew it. I learned that story when I was a child in Sunday school. And probably if you talk to somebody who has never been to a church in their life and you said, do you know the good story of the Good Samaritan? They'd probably say yes. They say it's about a kind person, a good Samaritan, who stops and helps a stranger on the side of the road. And if I said to you, oh, Rosalind, you are so wonderful, you are a good Samaritan, you would say, thank you, right? Like it's a compliment. You know, we know what a good Samaritan is. We say thank you. I've been waiting for someone to notice. But in reality, let's go back in history to a time where there was no such thing as Christianity. There was no such thing as the Gospel of Luke. There was nobody had written down any of this stuff. All there was a Jew named Jesus who is debating other Jewish people. All right. And so the Jews were just like the United Church of Christ or Christianity. They had their tribes. There were the Pharisees, the Levites. A lot of times their leaders are called lawyers, teachers, whatnot. And this might come as an enormous surprise to you. But these people of faith, these Jewish people broken up into all their little branches, they didn't always get along. They tended to be a little bit judgy of each other. Tend to be a little self-righteous even. I know this comes as an enormous shock, given the perfection of the Christian church of 2,000 years of history. But they were as broken as anybody. And so then you have Jesus who is preaching a slightly different message. And they're like, which of the 12 tribes of Israel do you come from so that I can know whether or not I'm mad at you? Right? Like, see, it's basically like, are you United Church of Christ? Or are you Catholic? Are you Pentecostal? Are you a Mormon? Right? I only ask out of curiosity, not. So just remember that when you hear these stories in the gospel where Jesus is having these people pester him with questions that seem up front to be very basic, and he gives back a very basic answer, and then they ask another question, guess what? Are they really curious? It's a trap. They want to pigeonhole Jesus. So this is the Bible study part. So Jesus, when he is asked by a fellow Jew, a lawyer, teacher, somebody very respected, excuse me, Jesus, I'd like you to clarify a few things. You know, I myself have several degrees. I've got some books I really think you ought to read, Jesus. But before you get to those, just want to ask you, you know, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life, in your opinion? Please justify with footnotes. And Jesus is so simple and basic and goes back to like, this is the most important commandment. You know, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. That's what it all boils down to. And he refuses to go down the rabbit hole of this other commandment or that one. And they can't stand it. And they're like, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus is not going to fall for it. So he does what he does in these situations. He just goes random. And he says, let me tell you a little story. He doesn't say this actually happened. He doesn't say it was me. He just says, let me tell you a little story, like the native Indians of this country have a saying. They say, I don't know if this story actually happened, but I know this story is true. It's one of those stories. It's a deep and powerful story. We call it a parable, which means it is not a fable. A fable has a moral that's easy to define. A stitch in time saves 9. A parable, you can't sum a parable up in a sentence, because you know what? If Jesus, the Son of God, wanted to sum it up in a sentence, he would not have fooled around with a parable. A parable is a precious gift of a story that has so many layers of meaning, like an onion, that you can hear it when you're 3 years old or when you're 83 years old. You can hear it 6 Sundays in a row. It always means something different to you because it is so dense. And if anybody ever tries to say, and what this parable means is, you need to say, shut up. If Jesus had wanted to say it in a motto or a fortune cookie, he could have done that. And so Jesus tells this story. Here's one more little bit of Bible study. I will get to the sermon. But in the United Church of Christ, we believe in learned clergy and learned church members. So in the Protestant Reformation, John Calvin, in Geneva, Switzerland, and others, they risked their lives. They had people being burned at the stake for what? So that we would have the right to read the Bible in our own language. I mean, imagine there was a time where you didn't get to even hear it in your own language. It was being mumbled up there in some other language. Nobody was listening. It was like, oh, don't worry your pretty little head about it. You wouldn't understand it. And they said, no, we will risk our lives so that you can read this in German, English. And John Calvin said, not only do you have the right as members of the church to read scripture, so it's not just for the minister, you not only do you have the right, you have the responsibility. With this gift comes responsibility. And if you're going to read something responsibly, you got to study it and you got to do your homework. And I know Dr. Selma does that teaching with you. And she treats you like you're ready for seminary and that you can handle the knowledge. She gives you the background, and it doesn't shake our faith, does it? Because like, we're not stupid people. It helps us. So to give you a little historical background, we hear the story today, the Good Samaritan, and we think that's a good person. Back in Jesus' day, the Samaritans were the mortal enemies of the Jewish people. This is important to realize. We think Samaritans are like nice people, you know, like, oh, good, a Samaritan. Like that's somebody who wears like a Christmas hat and rings a bell and, you know, stands outside a Kmart. No, they were your worst enemies. So when Jesus tells this story about the person on the side of the road, and then it's a Samaritan who helps, it's like the last person you would think would help you, ever, ever, ever. So I'm going to ask you to try something. We are not supposed to be prejudiced against anybody, but sometimes we are. And sometimes we think we might have a good reason. Because maybe there's a certain type of person who in our past has treated us badly. Maybe there's just certain types of people we don't trust, or we worry that they don't have our best interests at heart. I know I shouldn't think that there are groups of people like that, but we all have somebody. Just picture that group of people in your mind right now. And don't look at me blankly like you're spiritually superior to me, because I know you got somebody you might not trust. And you don't have to say who it is, but you just file it away, but imagine it. And then imagine the story being told. There's a man, he falls in a ditch, and he is hurt, and he is beaten to within an inch of his life. And he's down in this ditch. And he looks around for help. And he says, oh, thank goodness. There's the rabbi. There's Dr. Selma. Dr. Selma, I'm over here. Thank goodness. Dr. Selma says, no, I have to go to a United Church of Christ board meeting right now. So I will get right back to you. I'm sure somebody will assist you. Yeah, I'll pray for you, right? Then you look over here. Oh my goodness. Like that's somebody from church. You know, I'm over here. Recognize me. Do you see me? Oh yes, I do see you. I see you, but get right back to you. And you can't believe it. And then somebody you don't know comes out, but you kind of recognize them. And they just look shifty to you. They look untrustworthy. They look like the kind of person who hurt you before. And you say, oh, please don't let that person come near me. And then they do, and they get closer, and your heart is beating. And then you see it's a Samaritan. And you think it's bad enough to be rejected by my own family, but now I'm going to be victimized by my enemy. Imagine the shock when the touch comes upon you is not to hurt, but to help. And you are shaking because you still don't trust it. And this total stranger is like taking you and knows you don't trust him. And is like sensitive enough even to think through this. And so doesn't just say, I'm throwing you on my horse and we're going back to my place and you can trust that you'll be fine with me and all your enemies. No. This person actually takes the time to pick you up and address your wounds that are the most serious, and then gently says, how about I take you to a neutral place, to this person that you can trust, this innkeeper. How about we do that? How about I pay for that out of my own pocket? How about I do that not even in a showy way? I just go to the innkeeper and I say, you know what? Not only am I going to pay for this, but if this person needs to stay a little longer, don't make a big thing of it. Don't ask him for money. I'll just circle back. Okay. Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. You could paraphrase it today as, let me tell you the story of the good terrorist. My Aunt Gloria and my Uncle John from South Carolina is where I'm from. They had their own little Good Samaritan ditch experiences, as we all do. I mean, now today, the Good Samaritan, it's like we've defanged the power of the story. We think it's about be nice to other people, you know? So you learn about it at Sunday school, and little Johnny comes home from Sunday school and says, you know, Mommy, I learned about the Good Samaritan. Oh, isn't that wonderful? We're supposed to be like the Good Samaritan, right? Be a Good Samaritan. And so little Johnny says, so Mommy, I noticed that you just walked by that person who was asking for money. I thought we were supposed to be a Good Samaritan. Mommy says, well, you know, it is complicated. Little Johnny, I'd like to thank you for asking the question, and we'll address that when you're a little older. And the next time they walk down the street, Mommy says, okay, well, I'll give them some money. And little Johnny says, that's wonderful. But in the story, they take the man home and find him a place to stay. So I'm just curious about why we're not living that out. And Mommy's like, I got to talk to that Sunday school teacher. Because children aren't ready for this stuff. But maybe here's the scary part. Maybe it's the adults who aren't ready for it. But we defang the story. But also, here's the thing. For the mommy in this story, she's also fearful for her child. She knows that this is a hard world and that little Johnny would probably be foolish to trust that every stranger is going to help him. And mommy knows from hard life that sometimes probably mom has helped somebody who seemed like they were in need, and that person took advantage of her, abused her. And so mommy is of two minds on this story. And even to the extent that while we have Good Samaritan laws, right, that protect you if you help a stranger. You know, if you're in a restaurant, you're choking, I give you the Heimlich maneuver. You know, a Good Samaritan law means that you can't sue me later because I cracked your rib by accident, you know, because we recognize like life is better if we help each other. Like we don't want to be so paranoid and so litigious and so fearful that we can watch somebody die from choking on something in front of us, right? Like what's wrong with this place? And so my Aunt Gloria and my Uncle John, they were going to a fancy event, traveling from Anderson, South Carolina to Greenville, and it was dressy. And my Aunt Gloria is very fashionable, loves to dress up, loves anything sparkly, shiny, tight, high heels. The bigger the hair, the closer to God. Aunt Gloria would shop that TJ Maxx for every sparkly item in the store, and then she'd bring it home. And remember the little machine you had, the bedazzler? If it didn't have enough sparkles, Aunt Gloria would take it home and like add more sparkles. So Aunt Gloria's like sparkled up, ready to go to this event. And Uncle John was just kind of along for the ride. And as much as Aunt Gloria liked to spend some money on her clothes, Uncle John did not like to spend money on anything, particularly gas. Uncle John, there may be a few people in this room who have this strange belief. Uncle John was of the belief that the only responsible way to manage your money and your gas was that you would never put more than $5 of gas in the car at a time, because Uncle John knew that the fumes would get you an extra mile or two. And if you just fill it up, you lose the advantage. See, some of you are agreeing with this. I feel very sorry for the other people in your family, because I see that you are part of the delusion that Uncle John was part of. And sure enough, they are driving dressed to the nines, this fancy event, and the car breaks down. In the dark, on the highway, there's nobody around. And oh, to have been a fly on the wall and heard the tender words of that long married couple that they shared that night. So they realized their predicament. And so they said, all right, do we flag someone down for help? But the more they talked about it, they said, we're scared to. Isn't it sad? But we are afraid to flag somebody because they might rob us and steal our sparkling clothing. And so as weird as it sounds, they thought about sitting in the car, but then they thought somebody could come break the window somehow with a ball-peen hammer or something. So they ended up locking the car. Then they crawled down in the ditch on the side of the highway in the middle of the night, and they covered themselves with kudzu, which is a nasty plant from down south. It's like, you don't want to be covering yourself in kudzu, but nobody will come find you if you're covered in kudzu. So, and they spent the night in the ditch. Until finally, early in the morning, one of their neighbors from Anderson drives by and sees John's car on the side of the road and says, oh, I think I know what happened here. And John didn't get gas, and he picks them up, but they're rescued by one of their own, see? Because this is what we're comfortable with. Like, we would rather sleep in a ditch of nasty kudzu than trust the terrorist or whoever it is, right? And this is the problem with our society right now. I mean, this is why we can't talk to each other. We would rather be stuck, injured, wounded in a ditch than consider that someone we don't like could have a good bone in their body. I used to think when I was a child that the moral of the parable was that I should be a good Samaritan. That I would be the best little person ever. If I just could get it right. But as a grown-up, experiencing real life, I've come to believe that the Good Samaritan has nothing to do with us. That the character in this story that we are meant to dig into and explore and pay some attention to is who? It's the person in the ditch. But you don't know that if you're a naive, protected little kid. You only know that once you've been in the ditch. I had a little ditch experience going through life, but then I had my 1 year. It was the year 2015. I will never forget it. 7 years ago? And it was one of those times where everything that you could lose, you lose. I had been working at a big church in Chicago. Oh, it had grown. Everything was so wonderful. I was writing books and this and that. And guess what? I didn't have any friends. All I did was work, work, work. I was on this little treadmill for Jesus. I was operating under the grandiose assumption that perhaps it was my job to save Christianity. I let my personal life go. I lost my marriage. My kids moved out. I mean, they call it graduating, but to me, it was deeply hurtful. I'm still like mad about it. But they moved out, but no, divorce. And then you look around and you say, where's my life outside of my work in my church? Like, what hobbies do I have? My hobby was like writing books about Christianity. And I was in the ditch. And if you've ever been in the ditch, I mean, sometimes you feel like life pushes you in a ditch, and that's pretty bad. The only thing worse, though, is like once you land in the ditch, you get your own shovel and dig it deeper. I did a little of that. And I went from misery to misery. I made stupid choices. I let people down. I let my church down. I lost my job as a pastor. I never had another job other than being a pastor. I lost my vocation. I ended up losing my house. Today I call it my year of personal and vocational discernment. But back then it was my year in the ditch. It was where that I learned ditch happens. Life's a ditch. And then you die. And it was there in the ditch that I started thinking about this story differently. And I said, where's my good Samaritan? Because when I was in the ditch, if you've ever been in the ditch, if you have ever had one of these ditchy years, it happens just like the story, doesn't it? There are the people you are sure are going to come alongside you. You know, the ones you think, oh, well, I'm special, you know, I'm like a big shot in like my little United Church of Christ world and this and that. And you, oh, there you are over there. I see. Yeah, no, they don't see you. Right? Like, oh, wait, but I served this church for 10 and a half years, blurred out myself like, where are you? Oh, no, we're not allowed to speak with you right now. Right? I mean, it's like, I was in like house arrest for like a year. And then, you know, your mind puts you in a different kind of a ditch. And you just like, then even if somebody's trying to be kind to you, you don't want to pick up the phone because you've gotten there under the kudzu and you can't get out. But an amazing thing happened. When you've been in the ditch, first, when you're isolated like that, you finally have to talk to God. I mean, yeah, there's no one else to call or text, right? Like, it seems so obvious, but it's not. And it's just you and Jesus in the ditch, right? And you start to remember these stories. And you think, yeah, maybe the whole point of this is about being in the ditch. And then something else amazing happens. You're not alone forever. Other people come up on you on the ditch and you see them coming and you're like, oh, I hope that person doesn't come over here because I don't want them to see me in this ditch. That's humiliating. I would prefer anything to that. I would rather get no help, just make me invisible, let me climb under the kudzu. And they get closer and closer and you're like, I know you were here just to laugh at me. And they say, how can I help? And you are so humiliated because you've disliked this person, you've judged them, you've accused them of being judgmental. And what happens, they come up alongside you in the ditch and they say, Lillian, I have something to tell you. You can let me climb down here with you because I've been here before. Right? I have been here before. And I heard these amazing, powerful testimonies of people who had been in ditches worse than mine. And these were the people I thought were perfect. I was like, I had no idea you were so ditchy. You're like the ditchiest person I know. I thought you hated ditchy people. In many ways, the 2 years of COVID was like the church's ditch. We got dropped in a ditch where we were all isolated. There was nobody else from church to walk by. Everybody was in their own basement, in their own rabbit hole, going crazy, forgetting all their manners. You know, it's true, we did. Then Satan said, I've got a great idea. While you're trying to isolate and be safe, like, I've got a great idea. Let's make sure everyone has a laptop and Wi-Fi. So you can all go down your little conspiracy theories together. And then you're going to come back and see each other. You're going to be like, who the heck is this? Okay. I mean, this was the ditch. We couldn't do what we do. And we had to figure out, how do we get out of this? And I really think that was like finally at the point where we stopped trying to think, how do we get out of this? Like, how do we control the pandemic? How do we become psychic? I mean, remember the crazy things we did? We're washing our mail, you know? I mean, you know, we were doing our best, but it was like we were wearing garlic, trying to keep the vampires away, you know? And then there's other people who suddenly acted like they had a master's degree in public health. Well, you know, actually, blah, blah. Like, oh my gosh, I don't even want to go back there. Like, we were all so ignorant and we we're doing our best and we all were sure we were right. And oh, I don't want to go back in that ditch, but we were in that ditch. And then we've come alongside each other and we've had to say, like, yeah, it was a ditch for me too. And there's no church that wasn't affected. I don't care if you're the mega church with a jillion members, you are seeing way less people on Sunday in person. Probably 30% is average. If you're seeing more than 30% of what you see, you're doing great. And yes, we can all be happy about the online connections we made and that people could visit each other in their ditches online. That is a beautiful thing. But we are still climbing out and we are still wondering, what is my vocation in this? Like, I was wondering in that year, I was like, I have been so ditchy. God, do you have any useful plan for me? Could I be a pastor again? And it just started to nag at me like, no, you're meant to preach. You're meant to be a pastor. You just have to do it differently. You have to do it as if you actually believe in God. You have to do it as if you believe that you have been in the ditch. You're not going to forget being in the ditch, that you actually have a PhD from Ditch University and a master's degree from Ditch State. I realize I have to say that too. And, you know, you have to not forget that degree. Like, you have to hang that degree on your wall, because while no one would choose it, you learned more in that experience than any of your regular courses. And also, you got to find the beauty in the ditch lilies. I love ditch lilies now because they are tough. You know, they will not be cut back. And they get out of the ditch and they find their way into your garden. And some people call them weeds. I call them, it's the Good Samaritan story in action. Ditch asparagus. It just tastes better, you know. We can't ever forget the point of the story. When I was a child, I believed that the point of the story of the Good Samaritan was that I was meant to be the Good Samaritan. What life taught me was that we are all in the ditch. Jesus is the only Good Samaritan. And he picks us up, he dusts us off, and then he tenderly entrusts us into the care of another human being. That's what it means to be the church. Amen.